I'm here today in conversation with two amazing storytellers, with Phil Okwedi and Atinuke Akinyemi, both of Nigerian heritage but via very different routes to storytelling and to Pembrokeshire as well. So, Phil,
hello.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? How did you end up in Pembrokeshire?
Okay, so I'm Phil Okwedi. I was born in Cardiff, and I was long-term fostered, so I didn't grow up with my mother, although I always knew her. And I was fostered down in Pembroke Dock when I was about 2 weeks old. And so that's where I grew up. And actually, I didn't even grow up with the name Okwedi. I grew up with the name Graham, which had been my mother's married name before, not the marriage that I was born out of, an earlier marriage. But she kept the name, so I just had that name. Till I was in my early 20s, and then I had a son of my own, and I'd gone to college, and I began thinking about the power of names, and I changed my name to my father's name, because my father was Nigerian. He was Igbo, and my mother, he and my mother met in Cardiff. He'd come over here to study and to work, and that's where they met.
Cool. And what was your route to storytelling? What was it like growing up in Pembrokeshire, and how did you end up becoming a storyteller?
I loved growing up in Pembrokeshire in one sense. It was definitely my home. It's always felt like my home. But of course, there is no community here. So being, I think, a phrase that you've used, the only black in the village, kind of gives it a very unique flavour. But after I'd been to university in London, I came back here, I was raising my son, and I started teaching. And that's how I came to storytelling. In our school, we wanted to raise the attainment in the children's writing and identified that the children really didn't have stories in their heads. When you asked them to write a story, they had no structure. All their effort went on what happened next. So I always say what you'd get me and Johnny ran down the road, we saw a spaceship, and then in great big capital letters with lots of exclamation marks, bang, 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 bang. And this is like 45 minutes worth of writing. So we had a storyteller come in just to teach us how to tell a story, which all the teachers did. We then told stories to our classes. The children took on the stories, but in their own words. So, I mean, a lot of the phrases that I would have used, they'd have used, but it's very important it was their own language. So they had ownership. And that raised attainment in writing. But I really enjoyed the storytelling. So I sought out more storytelling in courses, and that's how I got into it.
And what has storytelling brought to your life in Pembrokeshire?
When I became a teacher quite late. All my life, I felt as though there was something I was waiting for, something I should be doing, storytelling. And now, I'm very fortunate. I no longer teach. I'm a freelance storyteller. And it gives me the wherewithal to remain in Pembrokeshire, to not be beholden on an employer. And over COVID, actually, it's been amazing. A lot of my work went online. It's just starting to become physical again. But yeah, it's been amazing.
And he looked up and he saw one of those golden birds and he thought, I think I know who you are. You must be the freedom bird. You must be the freedom bird because freedom cannot be killed. Freedom cannot be buried. Freedom cannot be kept down. And just like freedom, you have risen, you have grown, you have multiplied. And right there and then, he vowed never to hunt the freedom bird ever again.
And how has storytelling enriched your life and your perspective on the world?
These old stories, they've been around for hundreds, elements of them for thousands of years, which means they've been through countless mouths and ears, and they've been edited, and they just contain riches, I think. Wisdoms. Of course, they're just entertainments, and I tell them as entertainments. But for anybody who's ready to listen, that folk wisdom is in there to be found. And although I don't see that in the stories directly, I feel it. And so they enrich my life in that way. And then the work that I've been able to do and the people I've connected with through story has been amazing, really. Yeah.
Brilliant. And talk to me a little bit about Aesop. So I'm very interested because when we worked together last year for the first time, you brought a whole different perspective on Aesop's fables that blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's because we were working together online on storytelling, and I wanted to have some stories that were manageable for people who'd never told stories before. So something they would engage with. And Aesop stories are, a short paragraph, many of them. And I'd never told Aesop's fables. When I was a child, I was aware of them. The Boy Who Cried Wolf, that's me. It was actually told to me once because I was doing exactly that. But as I got older, and certainly as a storyteller, I just thought Aesop was some old white Greek guy and wasn't interested. So for practical reasons, I began looking, and I discovered that very probably Aesop was actually a black slave. And Aesop is derived from Ethiopia. And so he probably was a black slave. And the story that I shared when we were working together was of a slave being washed white. And I asked the question, which is an awful story, because there's a slave, someone buys a slave, he's black, they can't believe that he's really got black skin, they try and wash him white. Of course they can't. But if Aesop was black and he's telling that story, how does that change the meaning?
Makes a whole difference.
It makes a big difference, I think, doesn't it? Yeah.
Mm. So what do you think your cultural heritage has brought to your storytelling? Has your cultural heritage brought anything to your storytelling? How did you encounter your cultural heritage through storytelling?
As soon as I was storytelling, I went to look at Igbo folk tales and found them quite difficult to connect with, just as a body to tell, because I don't come from that culture. And then when I was looking at Welsh folk tales, it's quite similar. And actually what I found in storytelling was something that's familiar, that feeling of being an outsider, of not quite being Welsh enough, not quite being Igbo enough, not quite belonging anywhere. But what that's caused me to do is to find a way of making folktales relevant. So I do tell Igbo folktales now, but they're mixed with personal story in order to kind of create a myth, because I think that's what I felt I lacked. A cultural myth, but also a family myth, because growing up with my foster mother, and not a mother and father figure, that kind of myth. So it caused me to kind of develop something that speaks to me, and I hope in doing that the tales become contemporary and speak to others.
Yeah. And you've been involved in the Welsh Government's the Arts Council's embedding of the Black Asian minority ethnic history and culture in the curriculum and the Black History 365 Management Committee. In what way do you feel stories can bring Black Asian and minority ethnic history and culture into Welsh society?
Well, I think stories in general, from any culture that's represented within our broad culture, bring a recognition, but the stories travel. So versions of stories and the motifs in stories exist in many different places. I think in a very simple way with stories from Black, Asian, minority ethnic cultures, it's just a recognition of the value of them and the humanity of them, because listening to the story, it often doesn't matter at all what your cultural heritage is. What you're hearing is people and meeting people, and I think it's a way of into that.
Yeah. And do you think that stories and storytelling can change the world?
Definitely. Because in listening to story, learning to tell a story, often what people begin to do is tell their own stories. So that might be folktales from their own cultures, but it might be their own actual own personal stories. And so the more we're sharing voices, the more conversation that is happening, the more that idea of Cynefin, which is behind the Arts Council project, can begin to blossom, I hope.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, Mother. Thank you.
My name's Atinuke, and I came to West Wales about 20 years ago looking for somewhere to bring up my son, who's now 22. I came to visit a friend who had children, turned up at her house. My son was excited to play with her children after a long drive, and the kids weren't there. And I said, "Where are they?" She said, "I don't know. They might be down by the river, or they might have cycled to the beach, or they might have just gone across the valley where their friends live." And I thought, this is it. This is what I want for my son. I want him to grow up where he can be free, and he hasn't always got an adult supervising him, and he's safe, basically. So yeah, that's one of the main reasons I moved here.
And that I met you quite shortly after you moved then, because
Yes.
I met you when my son, who's now 21, was probably about 1. I know that he was talking.
Yeah.
And everyone said to me, "Oh, you've got to meet Atinuke, you've got to meet Atinuke." And funnily enough, my sisters called that. I was like, yes, I need to meet this person. So at that point, you were storytelling.
I was.
And
Yes.
what was your journey to storytelling?
I fell into storytelling by accident. So I had been asked I'd gone to a festival that a friend was organising, a children's festival. And I turned up saying, "I'm happy to help with anything." And one of her performers didn't turn up. And she said, "Please just go and tell them a story, please." And it was one of those moments where I really wanted to say no. And I didn't have the self-confidence to say no. And I'm so glad I didn't, because I went out onto the stage, told one of those stories that I just knew so well.
Can you remember what story it
Nigerian
was?
story. No, probably had a hunter in it. They're my favourite ones. Told this story, and I just felt this relationship with the audience that I can't describe. It was like they were on a ship and I was steering it, and I could take them wherever I wanted. I could make them laugh, I could make them cry, I could make them sad, I could make them happy, and it was incredible. It was just incredible. And then I was invited to another festival, and it was just word of mouth, just spread. I started going to festivals. If there were teachers in the audience, then they'd say, "Can you come to our school?" And I fell into it like that.
And when you're telling stories, it's always in your Niger, because we're both Yoruba heritage, Nigeria. Yeah. It's always in your Nigerian accent.
Yeah,
Why
that's
is
right.
that?
Well, the first story I told wasn't in my Nigerian accent. So I grew up mostly in Lagos, and Nigerian English was my first language. Came to boarding school in the UK when I was 10. This is my boarding school voice. They made me go to elocution lessons. Wow. So usually when I see white faces, this voice comes out. And when I first started telling stories, I told stories from everywhere and anywhere, all over the world. But more and more, it was the stories from either the African continent or the African diaspora that really resonated with me, where I really felt sure of myself, and I felt powerful, and I felt like I could bring the meaning of those stories to whatever audience. And then it just seemed natural to start telling them in my first voice, if you like, the voice of those stories. So, once upon a time, there was this young hunter, and he was not satisfied with being a hunter. Whenever he went to the marketplace, he would see the men who served the chief. Those men who ate so much, they were heavy. And their clothes were embroidered with gold, so they could hardly walk. And their caps were embroidered with gold, so their heads would go like this. Everyone could see they were wise, they were important. And our poor skinny little hunter, all he wanted was to be one of them, an important man who could barely hold up his own clothes. And as a writer now, when I write, I think in that voice.
Amazing. So where did the transition come between telling stories and then writing stories? What drew you to that?
I'd always wanted to be an author, which hadn't gone down well with my Nigerian family at all. Like, what are you talking about?
Lawyer.
Yeah, like, accountant. Of course, like, we need to support our families. We need professions where an income is guaranteed, and authors don't have a guaranteed income. So I'd kind of put that on the back burner. I'd always written. Storytelling involves a lot of travelling. And travelling around the world, travelling to schools, living in Pembrokeshire, even going to schools in the UK, it means 2 or 3 nights away. And I got ill, and I had been playing with some stories because at schools in the UK or in America, in the Western world, the children's schools, they always put their hands up after the storytelling session and say, what's it like growing up in Africa? In a mud hut, surrounded by wild animals? All this, like, all the stereotypes from the media would come out. And I would end up talking a long time about how I'd grown up in a mega city that's bigger than London, that's bigger than New York, full of traffic, so many cars that you can't even, not everybody's allowed to take their cars on the road on the same day. Like, depends on your number plate when you're allowed to drive. Because if everyone drove at the same time...
That was the first thing when I was reading this book. That was the first thing I was like, they go slow. Because my auntie, my Lady Bank Anthony, one of my great aunties, had 2 cars. One with a plate that ended with an even number and one with an odd number, so she could go out any day of the week. Every day,
exactly. And kids were always amazed, like, there are Coca-Cola factories. They thought we wouldn't even have heard of Coca-Cola on the African continent, let alone have factories making it. So while I was ill and unable to travel, I started writing the first Anna Hibiscus stories. So this series of books, there are 8 of these early chapter books. So they've got illustrations on every page for children who are just moving from picture books to reading their own little mini novels about a little girl growing up in a mega city.
Okay.
And I wrote them and I read them aloud to friends of children until a friend said, you got to send these off. I'm sure they can be published.
And did you believe that they would be published?
No, I didn't. And in fact, this friend irritated me. I thought, she's a hippie friend. I thought, oh, God, these hippies, She doesn't know anything about the real world. Like most publishers, you can't just send them an unsolicited manuscript. And I started avoiding her because she would always ask, like, have you sent them off yet? And then I thought, look, she's one of my dear friends. I'm avoiding her. Why don't I send them off? When I get the rejection slips, I'll show them to her. Maybe she'll shut up. So I sent them off and I got an acceptance.
Wow.
I know. So every book I publish now, she gets a copy.
Wow.
Because it's because of her. It's because of her.
And why was that why did you not feel confident that they would be published?
I think because I'd been told all my life it's impossible to be an author. It's only the chosen few. Nobody can make a living. Again, this thing about you have to have an agent, or they don't accept unsolicited manuscripts. And maybe a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-confidence. And I have to say, it's one of the best things for me about living in West Wales, is there's such a strong community here. And having moved so much in my life, living in a settled community where I feel that I have my place in the community and I'm supported and that I belong, in that sense of, yes, I'm from another continent and my skin's a different colour, but everyone knows who I am and that I fit in that little slot there. And the support of that friend who believed in me and who was going to go on about it until I did something about it.
Brilliant.
That living here has given me the confidence to do a lot of things.
Great.
Yeah.
And you're going to read a bit of a book for us.
Yes, I am.
Tutola.
So after writing Anna Hibiscus, which is set in a megacity, as a response to all those children's questions, imagining that every African child lives in the bush, I then realised that actually quite a lot of African children do live in the bush and are really poor. And it doesn't mean that they're not important. And it doesn't mean that their lives don't have dignity and that they're not clever and bright. It doesn't mean that they don't have exciting lives. So my second series is this series, The Number One Car Spotter. He doesn't go to school. He can't read and write. He's illiterate. His whole family are illiterate. And he has the most amazing adventures. He catches a gang of international car thieves in one of these books. But I'm going to read from my third series, which is really dear to my heart, which is set back in the megacity of Lagos, but this time in the slums. I grew up as a really privileged child. We had cars with air conditioning and drivers driving us around. But I could see out of the window that there were children running in the traffic, like selling matches and DVDs and taking their life between their hands to earn very little money. Children who obviously didn't go to school, children who begged. And their childhoods are important too.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read to you from Too Small Tola. Tola lives in a run-down block of flats in the mega city of Lagos, in the country of Nigeria. She lives with her sister Moji, who is very clever, her brother Dapo, who is very fast, and grandmommy, who is very, very bossy. Tola is the youngest in her family and the smallest, and everybody calls her Too Small Tola, which makes her feel too small. Tola, shouts grandmommy, "Oya shopping, let's go." Tola looks at grandmommy in surprise. Shopping isn't her job. She's far too small to carry shopping. "Why are you standing there looking at me?" asks grandmommy. "Hurry up." "But..." Tola starts to argue. She looks at her sister Moji. Moji is big enough to carry a mammy wagon load of shopping. But Moji is sitting at her borrowed computer doing her homework. She is wearing one of her A-star looks of concentration. Tola sighs. Everybody knows not to get in Moji's way when she is wearing an A-star look. But what about her brother, Dapo? Dapo is fast. He could reach market faster than an Okada taxi. But through the open window, carried on air as hot as pepper soup, come the sounds of boys playing football. "Goal!" the boys roar. Then they start to chant, "Dakpo, Dakpo, Dakpo." Tola sighs again. Everybody knows that Dakpo is fantastic at football and useless at everything else. Grandmommy says his tactics for avoiding housework are as good as his football tactics. Tola looks at grandmommy. She is wearing one of her "what did I tell you" looks. "Just hurry up, Tola," she says. Tola hurries to put the big shopping basket on her head. She does not want to upset Grandmommy. If Grandmommy is upset, soon everybody will be upset. Grandmommy passes on her moods faster than mosquitoes pass on malaria.
Oh, that was brilliant. Oh, I need to read it. Is it an audiobook yet?
Not yet.
Oh, there we go. Gap in the market. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me and for sharing your inspirational and fabulous creativity with us all. Thank you.
Thank you.